Welcome back to another episode of Trucker Talk Radio Behind the Wheelhouse. I'm your co-host Justin, and alongside me for the first time in a while is my co-host Jonathan. Today's conversation is one that affects every carrier, broker, dispatcher, fleet owner, and professional driver: cybersecurity. For years, trucking companies focus on protecting trucks, freight, drivers from physical threats. Today, some of the biggest threats don't even arrive at a truck stop or a shipping dock. They arrive through an email, a fake website, stolen password. I can just go on and on. Before we get started, though, I'd like to thank ReadyApp for supporting our episode today. At ReadyApp, we're focused on helping create a more trusted transportation industry through Driver Verify and the ReadyApp Digital Passport, a verified digital identity that helps carriers, brokers, and drivers build a stronger, more secure relationship. As technology continues to transforming trucking, trusted information and verified identities are becoming just as important as the equipment we put on the road. Today's conversation fits this perfectly. So everybody go check them out at ready-app.com. Get your driver passport today if you're a truck driver. Our guest today is helping the trucking industry defend itself against one of the fastest growing threats facing the transportation. Benjamin Wilkens is the Director of Cybersecurity for the National Motor Freight Traffic Association, where he leads cybersecurity education, research, and practical guidance for fleets throughout North America. His work has helped carriers understand emerging cyber threats, cargo theft, artificial intelligence, and digital security while providing tools fleets are actually implementing. What makes Benjamin especially unique is that before entering cybersecurity, he spent years as a professional Class A truck driver and later worked as a driver manager. He understands trucking from both ends, the driver's seat and the server room. Benjamin, welcome to Behind the Wheelhouse.
Thanks for having me. That's quite the intro. So I appreciate that. Makes me sound a whole lot smarter than I am, I think.
But no, your perspective is something very unique. That I don't know if there's probably a handful of people that's got that qualification of being in the seat and then can deal with the cybersecurity stuff, because that's something that me and John speak on here a lot about is just crime in general, and cybersecurity is the probably the easiest one to get duped by, because you don't pay attention. You get 1,000 emails a day. More than likely there's a good chance you're going to click on it. But before we get into all that good stuff, kind of tell us a little bit about how you got into trucking, how you got into that driver's seat.
Yeah, so I mean that's going to take us back a couple of decades, but I worked in and around transportation. I was actually in heavy construction originally, and I used to see the truck come and go on the job sites. And I thought, you know what, that looks like a pretty decent, right? Decent role. And made friends with a couple of the drivers, started talking about their day to day, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to give this a whirl. And went and got my CDL, and I started kind of hauling local and moving equipment around, that type of thing. It doesn't take long to get pulled into the over the road gang, and get out there and see the country. And so did that for a few years. It was like a lot of people, my family life was kind of dictated coming off the road, and I didn't want to leave the industry by that point, though, because that's the beauty of the trucking community is you can stay right in the industry, but you can jump to a whole bunch of different roles. There's so many seats to fill. And so I stayed right in the industry, went into dispatching, and kind of the rest is history from there.
Yeah. So at what point did the tech side start, tugging at you, tugging at those heartstrings? Because going from a driver's seat to cybersecurity is not, it's not exactly a straight line.
No, it's not. It's so I've been interested in technology and computers my whole life. So kind of as a hobby and just something I did in my spare time. And when I was in the dispatch seat, actually, I started looking around at the systems and the tools that we were using, and that got the kind of the technology brain working and thinking, what are the gaps? What can we do differently? Where can I help kind of increase efficiencies and those kinds of things? And realized that one of the things that was really kind of the missing piece was the security component, because as we were tying more integrations in and bringing in new software, it was often in the name of speed and efficiency. And it was less about how do we do this securely, and how do we keep a cybersecurity conscious mindset kind of at the forefront. And so that was, that's what drew me back into technology, was kind of assisting with those integrations and things. But I was pulled quickly from just technology and integrations back into the security world. We had a couple of near misses, so it sort of opened my eyes to how serious this threat was in our industry. And decided that I really wanted to go, and I went and got a little bit more education in the cybersecurity specifically, and stuck around to apply that in trucking.
Hey drivers, our partners over at Zero Breeze have designed a no idle air conditioner for sleeper cabs and fleets that can pay for itself in just one summer. If you're spending up to $40 a night in fuel, it's time to stop idling and start saving. For $50 off, email sales@zerobreeze.com or text them at 945-247-1298. And don't forget to ask them about their extended warranty option. Check them out today at zerobreeze.com.
My son, well, he's going to law school now, but he moved over from engineering to cybersecurity, and I was kind of like, "You mean IT?" And he's like, "No, it's cybersecurity. It's a much bigger problem." And that's, I think that's, gets cybersecurity previously, maybe not so much now today, but previously got filed straight under IT. And that, that's the computer people's job, not mine. And, why is that thinking, so dangerous? Because cybersecurity is a big deal. I mean, the people at ReadyApp, we talk about it all the time. I mean, like, there's always somebody trying to break in, right? So tell us about that. Like, how is cybersecurity different?
Yeah, so that's a really common misconception. Even now, you often see cybersecurity lumped in with the tech side. It's the IT job, and I used to joke that if it plugged into a wall or had a battery, it becomes IT's job. It's one of those things where it's a technology discipline. You have to understand the technology in the same way that an IT, sysadmin or somebody manning a help desk understands the technology. But beyond that, you have to understand the business, and you have to understand the risk and the attack surface that the business has. And, to do that, you have to be broader than just the IT silo. You have to be embedded in all of the different aspects of the business, the operations side, the maintenance side, the back office, to really see where those gaps are that need to be guarded, and to understand what are the business challenges, and is security getting in the way of them, or is security helping to facilitate safely doing business?
So, here on the show, we mainly talk about, double brokering, Trojan drivers, just cargo theft in general. But for our drivers and our audience that, really doesn't know much about trucking and that's all they hear, explain some of that cyber security, crimes that they're out there that, you're fighting. I mean, like from what I know, the finishing emails where you click on the wrong thing in the email and then they hack your computer. But I would imagine there's a lot more to that stuff. So if you could kind of elaborate on that just a little bit to our audience.
For sure. Yeah, I mean that's probably north of 90%. I mean, I've heard all sorts of different statistics, and I hate to throw a number out there and say this is the number, because they can vary, but high percentage of successful cybercrime starts with phishing, some sort of social engineering, and it might be over the phone. We see some scams they call and they pretend to be the help desk, to try and help you out. It doesn't really work at a small organization where everybody knows the help desk guy. But at a larger enterprise, you might have never met the folks that work in IT or help desk. So they pose as that, either through email or on the phone. They get you to click a link or run a command in the window, and from there they just install the tools they need to get into your system. And that's where the cybercrime and cargo crime share that attack vector, that way in. But that's where they differ. When a kind of traditional cyber criminal gets in that way, they're looking for data. They're looking to either encrypt your data and hold it for ransom, or they're looking to steal data. And they'll extort you to not release that data publicly. A cargo thief is looking for different stuff. They're looking for credentials. They're looking for load board credentials. They're looking for email that's, load tenders and shipment information via email, all that kind of stuff, because they're plotting. They're finding the loads, they're finding the high value shipments, and they're going to infiltrate in that way, insert themselves in those conversations and hijack that load. So they share a front door, kind of, so to speak, but the kind of the methods after that differ a little bit.
So a lot of our listeners are smaller carriers, and they say, I'm too small for any of this to happen. Nobody's coming after me. What do you say to those guys? I mean, is that true, or is that exactly the kind of people that they're going after? Kind of companies
So
they're going after?
if I put my bad actor hat on, I would say you're my perfect target. You don't have a security budget. You don't have a security program. You might not have all the tools in place, that a larger enterprise does, and you can't afford to take a hit. Downtime can shut down a small business. They don't necessarily have the large cash reserves. They don't have redundancies, things like that built into the operation in the same way that some of the larger enterprises can take a hit like that and keep going. And so when they're either hit with ransomware, or their data is stolen and they threaten to release the data, driver health records from drug testing and payroll records or internal emails, all that type of stuff. They're not looking for a $2 million payday. They're going to look for how much you can afford to pay, and that's how much they're going to charge you. Because they want their money. The whole point is they want to get paid. So they're going to right size their ransom for your operation, whether you're big, small, or mid size. But the smaller end that doesn't have the security is a very attractive target.
So when you're sitting down and talking to these fleets, what are you saying to them? What walk us through kind of like what kind of like safeguards you're having them put in place?
So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to break the bank, to really take yourself out of low hanging fruit. We talk a lot about things like multi-factor authentication. That's an easy step. Password hygiene. Don't share passwords between people. Don't have the same password for more than one account. If you use it for your bank, don't use it for your email or your social media, things like that. Um, you know, Thinking about email security, having a domain that's tied to your business, not just using a Gmail account. It becomes harder to impersonate you, and you can put a little bit better security around your email in that way. Um, it's about processes. A lot of it's about processes, teaching people social engineering awareness, how this stuff works, and why not to just click on a link or download a PDF that somebody sent you that looks like a broker agreement, things like that. So it's awareness training and some really core best practices that again, not going to break the bank, not even going to take an IT or cybersecurity person to implement a lot of these. Their business changes, their process changes. And it really takes you from a very easy target to just hard enough that you're going to get passed over for the next guy that's maybe a little easier.
So what is the biggest mistake you see, larger companies or smaller companies making these days? Because I think a lot of times, cyber crimes don't make the headlines in trucking like everything else does. So I feel like a lot of them just kind of like John said, it's not going to happen to me, or push it to the side. I'm too worried about the double brokering or the fraudulent driver that's going to pick my load up and run off with it. But what do
Mm-hmm.
you see the mistakes that they do?
Well, I think one of the mistakes is, and actually you kind of described it, is they're focusing on the cargo theft, the double brokering, that type of fraud. One of the misconceptions is that that's separate from cybercrime. Increasingly, those two things are in the same conversation. And so what I always try to stress is, if you want to combat cargo theft and you want to combat fraud, put some of these same controls in place that we were talking about on the cybersecurity side. They're going to help you on the cargo loss side. They're going to help you prevent fraud, and your folks are going to resist social engineering, which is used by cargo criminals and fraudulent actors on that side. So it's kind of, I like to say it's the conversation starter that works in trucking, is to talk about cargo crime and fraud and double brokering and those types of things, and then we tie that back into cybersecurity best practices are going to help you there as well. So that it changes cybersecurity from a cost center, just something you've got to spend money on, that is sort of this ethereal concept that doesn't really mean much, and it turns it into something that's very practical in our industry and actually stops real dollar losses.
So I want to ask you one other thing kind of in that scenario. So I agree with what you say about Gmail. I hate Gmail for any type of business. I complain on here all the time about it. A lot of our load boards out there accept Gmail. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. Is there something that should be done on the other end away from the carrier side or the broker side, like your load boards or any other secure? Is there more things that they should be doing to try to help, make it to where you can't use a Gmail? So then they're not going to go after a Gmail to get it, because what drives me insane is you go to the DAT board, and I'm just using them as an example, but you'll see it say john.tql@gmail.com. Well, that truck driver's doing 5 things. He sees TQL. He calls on the load. He don't even pay attention that it's at TQL. But is there things that can be done on the other side of the spectrum?
Yeah, I think it's no one portion of the industry is going to be able to solve this. Carriers can do all the things right, brokers could do all the things right, shippers could do all the things right, but if everybody's not working together, and that includes the load boards and things like that, we really have to start tightening the screws on identity verification. And it is unfortunate because it starts to make it a little bit more difficult for, to say the single owner operator. You don't get into trucking because you want to do tech. You get into trucking because you want to do trucking, right?
Yep.
So it can be intimidating. It can be just one of those things that, yeah, I should do that, but it's never the highest priority to switch over my email. I'm worried about where the next load is and if I'm going to deliver on time, or the weather, or a breakdown, whatever. So it's kind of, yes, they need to do better identity management or identity verification on the load boards, but it's also a big part of its education on the why, right? Because if we just go through and say, yep, Gmail's out, you can't use Gmail anymore, you're going to have a mutiny. We've got to, we've got to teach
Yeah.
the why and teach people the
Mhm.
alternative, make the resources available, which is, a big part of what I spend my days doing, is trying to make resources available to say, this isn't out of reach for you as an owner operator. This isn't out of reach for you as a 5 truck operation. But yeah, identity verification is a huge piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, I think and that's one of the things that we talk about at ReadyApp is, we're not identifying who the driver is behind the wheel. We're not going to the furthest extent to make sure that the person who's assigned to this load is the person who's actually picking up and delivering the load. And there's no way to track that. It's tracking the truck number and the carrier's authority is not enough. We need to go further. CargoNet reported more than 1,120 cargo theft incidents and $121 million in losses just in the first 5 months of the year. And that's and what's interesting is that in some of the reports show that old school trailer theft is actually dipping while fraud schemes are actually climbing. So you have deceptive pickups, carrier impersonation, and all of it's jumping huge. Explain to our listeners, because I don't know that everybody has a good idea, like how serious this problem has gotten, and it's continuing to get worse and worse. Every guest that we have on this show mentions fraud. Mentions fraud. We can't go a single show without discussing it, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Talk about how serious it's gotten.
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves on this. I mean, if you look at 2025, we had 700, CargoNet's report, 725 million in reported cargo crime in 2025. And anybody in the industry knows we aren't reporting every incident. We're not reporting,
Right.
This is the tip of the iceberg. So we know the numbers are massive. This year looks like it's on track to at least meet or hopefully not exceed, but it's on target for some similar losses. So I think, why would I steal a trailer and risk getting caught when I can just orchestrate it from afar and have somebody else move the shipment? That's why we're seeing that shift. It's a layer of removal from the actual crime, the physical portion of it. It's harder to detect. And there's some players that have moved into this space. They've been here for a long time, but they're increasing their volume, that are highly organized. We're talking about transnational organized crime here. We're not talking about little fly-by-night local operations in most places. So these are sophisticated fraud rings. They're highly organized, and so they've been seeing massive returns on their investments. They're making money hand over fist with this, and that we're starting to put pressure on the issue. Really at the federal level, we're starting to see some movement there, and the FBI is getting pretty tuned into this issue. But it's going to take a lot of coordination between the industry, federal government, state and local law enforcement. This is way bigger than any one organization or one piece of the industry. This is a massive problem.
Yeah, and one thing I want to get your opinion on too is there's a new thing, and again, our team at ReadyApp has talked about this. There's a new thing folks are calling the Trojan driver, where the theft comes from inside the hiring process itself. A
Mhm.
legit carrier, so a legit carrier hires somebody, and that somebody is the problem, right? How worried should these carriers be about this, Trojan driver and who they're hiring?
Yeah, I mean it's a real risk, isn't it? I mean, we see insider risk, or insider threats across a lot of different portions of the organization. You think of like somebody embezzling money, that's kind of the
Mhm.
classic example.
Right.
But the drivers have access to $1 million shipments. They're in charge of that shipment out on the road by themselves. And if we're not doing a good job with our identity verification at the beginning, then it can come back and bite you. So again, we tie it back to, you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to be using the tools that are available to do background checks, to vet these drivers, really contact other carriers they've worked for, not just check that they work there, but make sure that there's not some sort of a black mark there that you need to be aware of. Don't skip steps in that background check. And then watching for patterns, watching behaviors once a driver is on board, and if anomalies crop up, or you see something that you're like, that seems a little odd, have the conversation early. These if somebody's in this business to defraud you or to steal freight, and you start asking questions and you start watching them and talking to them about it, and maybe not putting them on high value shipments for a little while you kind of suss out what's the threat level. They're not going to stick around. They're going to find, again, it's just like the cyber criminal. If you've got good defenses, they're going to find an easier target. But it's definitely an issue. I mean, I was talking to someone at a trade show recently who's done a lot of investigation into one of these organized rings, and they're estimating that it's somewhere north of 6,000 drivers that are a part of this organization. And this is not all willing participants. A lot of these are being blackmailed into it with threats over their families. If they're maybe their families live overseas where these operations are based out of. So this is a serious issue with, the drivers are definitely a part of it. Somebody's got to be driving the truck. We see a lot of times an innocent driver is duped into hauling a load for the criminals, but there's plenty of criminals driving trucks out there as well.
Absolutely. So at ReadyApp, we've created a digital passport where a driver goes in, they own their, even though they already have it, but they own their identity. Everything can be put in this digital passport, everything they need, from CDL, medical cards, picture of the truck, insurance, endorsements, you name it, can go in there. How important is it for the driver, just like it is with your regular credit check? You're always checking your social security number. You want to make sure that, everything's in line so no one's using it. Is it not getting to that point where it's that way for a driver, for several different reasons, not only for the security part, but I think drivers have got to figure out a way, and they can do it with ReadyApp, to stand out from the crowd. The good drivers have, even though in my opinion, drivers shouldn't have to do that. If you're a good driver, you should be known. But with all the mess that we've got when it comes to a driver, drivers have got to do more to stand out and to protect themselves.
Yeah, and you've got to I preach credit monitoring and identity monitoring all the time. I think everybody should be doing that, and know what your footprint is. and protect it. We see every single day there's a breach somewhere where somebody's information is getting or thousands of people's information is getting stolen, and you've got to be aware of that. You got to be aware if you've been affected by that, and you have to manage your digital identity just the same way as you wouldn't leave your passport sitting on the shelf in a truck stop or your driver's license sitting on the shelf in the truck stop. You don't want to leave your digital identity exposed either, because really at the end of the day, that's who that's what we have to prove who we are. And if that gets compromised, you just look at an owner operator who's had their operating authority used and then burned by one of these fraud people, the fraudsters. It's awful hard to get your MC number cleared once you're associated with fraud. Some say it'd be easier to just get a new MC number, but then you lose all your history. So we definitely need to be teaching awareness, number one, and then utilize the tools that are out there to protect your digital identity. Absolutely.
Ben, speaking of tools, AI is in every conversation right now, and it cuts both ways. Your own reports talk about AI assisted social engineering and deep fakes on the attacker side. So would you say AI is more beneficial to help the defenders more or the attackers?
Can I give you an "it depends," which is the worst
Yeah,
kind of answer?
yeah.
It really depends, though. I mean, if we take the attacker side, you mentioned social engineering. If I don't speak your language as a first language, it's going to be awful hard for me to talk you into doing something in a believable way. If I use AI and I just prompt that I want to craft an email in your language and your dialect, and for your industry using slang terms, and I want it to come across as a broker, well, that's going to be a whole different email. It's not going to have the bad grammar and the poor spelling and the lack of context. It's going to look exactly like it came from a legit broker who knows the industry, who probably even knows you. So in that respect, it's an awful useful tool for them. Now, on the flip side of that, as a defender, I can use AI powered cyber defense tools to detect social engineering, to pick up the needle in the pile of needles that we would miss as a human. So in that respect, it's a powerful tool for the defenders. I think what we're in the middle of is this game of cat and mouse. We've played it for as long as security's been a practice, where new technology comes out, the bad actors figure out how to use it for ill. Defenders catch up. We figure out how to defend against that attack. The attackers pivot. They find something new, and it's just this constant ratcheting up. We're seeing that now with AI. The difference is the speed and the scale has changed. They can build tools, exploits much faster using AI coding assistance, but we can also detect things at machine speed now that we would normally have to wait for an alert on and then triage with a person and all of these things. So it really depends on the context, but it is being used actively on both sides to a great extent. Absolutely.
Basically, carriers shouldn't be scared to use AI. Then they need to go ahead and use it, and then try to use it to defend, if nothing else.
Yeah, I tell people that be cautious about the way you use it, but don't shy away from using it. Every industry is being impacted. The people that are figuring out how to use it effectively and securely are going to start pulling ahead of those that aren't, just by matter of the capabilities they have, the efficiencies they can gain. But there's all the different things that are positive about AI, whether it's data analysis or security or optimizations or anything. But if you just go and bolt AI onto everything and you don't understand the security risks and the implications of doing that, you're opening yourself up for a whole new set of problems. It's definitely about doing it securely. It's not about whether or not to do it, really, at this stage in the game.
So where do you think this lands in the next few years? I mean, bringing in with AI, further advancing it, I feel like it advances every day. It gets smarter and smarter every day. And then, autonomous trucks coming into the fold. Do you feel like, we're opening, the door for more problems, more issues with fraud, with autonomous vehicles and hacking into those? I mean, that gives me some nightmares.
Yeah, we're definitely entering an era. We're in an era of kind of mind-numbing speed of change. We've seen advances in technology, the whole time we've been in our careers.
Yeah, you're right.
But
I
the
almost felt like we went through like a 7 to 10 year period where nothing happened. And then all of
Yeah.
a sudden now it's
Yeah.
like light speed. And we're talking
we had
about
10 years of
robots in our
progress
home.
in the last 4 months.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. We're
Right.
talking
it's
about
Yeah.
robots in our homes and
yeah,
vehicles that will take us from door to door.
it's pretty wild. And from being a cybersecurity practitioner, I always have kind of I get accused of having doom and gloom here when I talk about this stuff, but I try to be an optimist where there's serious upsides to these technologies. There's no doubt about that from a safety side, from an efficiency side, from a capability side. But what I am concerned about is rushing to implement new technology before we understand it and before we understand how to fully secure it. That's the part that keeps me up at night. If I look down, I have a hard time looking 3 or 5 years, but if we say the 6 month outlook or the year outlook, um, I see us getting better at adopting this or, keeping pace with this pace of change, keeping up with the speed of change. I see us, we're in a pretty steep learning curve right now with a lot of this new technology. But I think that we're starting to understand that this isn't change that we have to put into our operation every single time something new and shiny comes out. That we need to be thinking about this in a strategic way and say, okay, what am I trying to do in my business? And then is there a new technology that's come out that can help me? Not this new technology came out, where can I plug it in?
Tell us a little bit about the MFTA. What do y'all do there, in the battle of cybersecurity?
So we do a couple of different things. We've got on the hardware side, we've got a team of researchers that actually look at the trucks, the trailers, the telematics systems, the ELDs, sensors, the reefer units, all those type of hardware, rolling assets, all that stuff. And they
Mhm.
actually dig into those. They try to hack those and figure out if there's ways to break in and do bad stuff, basically. And then they figure out how to protect against that. We work a lot with the OEMs. If things are discovered, they're reported back to the OEMs, and they work with those engineering teams to get that fixed. So that's the hardware side or the asset side. And then on the enterprise side, we also do a lot of research and best practices development on that side. So like our best practices frameworks that came out, the guidebook series that came out last year. We
Mhm.
just released an AI framework this year, just last month, to really help folks securely adopt AI in their organizations. We do a lot of research in cargo crime, built out a lot of best practices on preventing cargo crime and fraud. We run a freight fraud prevention hub. So it's a collaborative space where we've got a lot of different key players in the industry putting together resources and educational materials and best practices for preventing fraud and cargo crime. So we run that. We've got an anonymous threat reporting portal that folks can report cargo crime, cyber events. It's all anonymized. As soon as we get one reported, we kind of dig in and fact check it and verify it. And then that information goes out without the reporting entity's information, but the event goes out to everyone else in that was registered for the threat report portal. So kind of some early warning tripwire type
Mhm.
stuff there. But we've got a lot on our plate these days. We're kind of trying to push a lot of initiatives forward because it's really we're at an inflection point in this industry when it comes to security and when it comes to fraud, and we've got to start really banding together to fix some of these problems.
So National Motor Freight Traffic Association puts on the only cybersecurity conference in the whole trucking industry. First, why should a fleet manager make the trip? And then second, if somebody listening who owns a fleet wants to start improving their security today, what do you tell them is step one?
Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug here. Step one is go to the NMFTA website and download the cybersecurity best practices
Absolutely.
The
guidebooks.
perfect setup.
That's a really great place to start though, because it will give you a structured way that takes that element of being overwhelmed out of this out of this conversation, because when you look at something as a huge issue that you don't really understand, but you know you need to solve, that's very intimidating. When you have it broken down into small pieces, you know, low hanging fruit that you can do today, you know, midterm stuff that you can plan for, and then your long-term strategy to aim for in the future, it becomes a much more manageable issue. And so that's how we laid out all of these guidebooks. So I would say that's a great place to start, and start with the education piece and build out a plan from there. And that's, we teach a lot of that at the conference in person as well. We have a lot of conversations about how do I build a security program? How do I do social engineering awareness training? How can I protect my maintenance fleet, you know, my maintenance team, from some of the threats that they're facing? So we bring in experts from across the industry. There's folks that are practitioners at fleets. There's folks that are hardware researchers. There's OEMs are represented there. Their technical teams come. We've got, you know, hardware hackers and the really deep dive kind of folks as well. So it's a really great place to learn about security in a venue where you're not expected to be an expert when you come in the door, and the folks that are talking to you, they understand trucking. It's not a generic security conference that you're going to go and, you know, somebody's going to beat you over the head with acronyms for a week. You know, we really bring people in who understand trucking, who can speak to the real issues that we have in this industry, and educate folks where they are, you know, and not expect that expert level coming in.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, you kind of brought it up just a little bit ago, and I was curious. I had a guest on the show the other day, and he was very adamant explaining that the Department of Transportation doesn't have nowhere near enough employees. And when he threw me the numbers out, I mean, it made sense when you got 3.5 million drivers and 700,000, MCDOT numbers. Do y'all get a lot of feedback or able to give the Department of Transportation, much feedback? Because I know they're understaffed, and it seems like trucking is always the one that no one worries about. And I think after what's gone on the last couple of years, trucking to me is a national security issue. It's the most important industry in the country. I mean, if trucks shut down for one day, we'd probably have riots. I mean, people don't realize that, but that's just facts. Do y'all have a good, relationship where, y'all can, give them stuff to try to help? Because I do know they're undermanned and underwoman pretty easy.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about the criticality of this industry. I mean, if you think about critical infrastructure sectors, we support every single one of them. You know, not a single critical infrastructure sector can survive without trucking. You know, so we really do underpin the entire economy. And from a national security perspective as well, you know, the logistics of moving things for our, you know, our defense forces, you know, and I mean that those go on trucks. So um, you know, do we have those conversations? Absolutely. You know, we bring our research to FMCSA, to DOT. We help support policy and you know, kind of push that ball forward everywhere we can. But you know, again, without the industry going to the federal government and saying, this is what we need, but this is what we can offer to help. You know, we can't just say, DOT, you got to fix this problem. We as the industry have to be part of the solution. And part of that is the awareness going up to the federal government, but it's also educating the industry at large of how they can get involved and how they can help be a part of the solution as well. I think it goes both ways.
Let me ask you, I'm just curious, is there a proudest accomplishment what you've been that's happened since you've been working in cybersecurity? Let's get personal. I mean, let's tell us about a time where, man, like, wow, like I really helped this situation out. I really figured out the problem and resolved it. Tell us about one of your proudest moments.
Yeah, oh boy, there's been some fun, like, you know, celebration moments where you figure out something that's been happening, that you know, something creeping around your network or something like that. But I think one of the ones that I enjoyed the most was I had been doing some research about a camera system that we had deployed at an organization I worked for. And I knew it was manufactured in shall we say, a country that's less aligned with the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Well,
inexpensive. Let's
okay.
put it that way.
Uh-huh.
And I had a theory on this camera system that it might be doing more than it said it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started digging and monitoring and really kind of poking and prodding this thing. And we did determine that it was phoning home at pretty regular intervals and
Oh,
in a
wow.
way that it had no reason to. So we were able to quarantine it and we took it off the network. And it was the justification I needed to mothball this system that I hadn't been pleased with for a while. So that was a fun little moment for sure.
How much of the fraud would you say is coming from overseas?
Well, if we're talking about the cargo crime, a significant portion of it is orchestrated overseas. It's a combination. I mean, I'm not going to say it's all foreign. There's certainly domestic organizations as well, but many of them have ties to these transnational groups. That are orchestrated overseas, which again, it makes the prosecution that much harder. Non-extradition countries are awfully hard to reach in and hold people accountable. Um, but yeah, there's definitely a significant portion of it. And cybercrime, we see huge majority of that coming from overseas. Eastern Europe, Asia, Iran, a bunch of places.
Before we let you go, where can folks learn more about NMFTA and find you and learn about the cybersecurity work that you guys do?
Absolutely. Yeah, the easiest place to start, go to nmfta.org. All of our resources are there. We put articles and blogs up there, and there's some resources, webinars, recordings, and things like that as well. Links to the conference website on there, so you can get all the information about who's going to be there and the logistics of where it is, when it is, all that stuff. And I guess I can plug that as well while we're on it, but September 29th in Long Beach, California.
Okay.
So that's definitely something to mark on the calendar. If
Yeah.
you want to get in touch with me personally, I'm all over LinkedIn. Reach out to me there. I'm pretty active and always try to make time for folks if they reach out. So definitely available there.
Well, Ben, we sure do appreciate you taking the time and coming on the show and talking about something that doesn't get talked about enough with cybersecurity. And we appreciate what work you and the National Motor Freight Traffic Association are doing to help educate. Probably the main thing, is just educating the smaller carriers for sure that don't understand. So we definitely appreciate that. Everybody, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Trucker Talk Radio. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe, like, follow, leave us a review, share us. We appreciate all that support. And until next time, we appreciate everybody and appreciate you again, Ben. And thanks again for being on Trucker Talk Radio.
Thanks for having me.
Today's episode is sponsored by Gray Cross. Every day, professional drivers make sacrifices that most people never see. Long hours, missed holidays, time away from family, and the responsibility of keeping America's supply chain moving. Gray Cross was created to support those drivers and their families when life takes an unexpected turn. By providing assistance, resources, and support during the difficult times, Gray Cross helps strengthen the trucking community one family at a time. Because behind every truck is a driver. Behind every driver is a family counting on them. If you'd like to support the mission, visit graycross.org to learn more. Donations are always appreciated, but simply sharing their message with others in the industry can make a tremendous difference. Gray Cross, supporting the people who keep America moving. Today's episode is brought to you by ReadyApp. Trust is the one most valuable asset in transportation. That's why ReadyApp created Driver Verify. Driver Verify helps carriers, brokers, and transportation companies gain greater confidence through verified driver identities, professional credentials, work history, and onboarding visibility. Drivers can securely maintain CDL information, endorsements, certifications, and employment records all in one professional profile. As fraud continues to impact the transportation industry, verification has never been more important. ReadyApp, verified drivers, trusted freight. Go check them out at ready-app.com.